Joined by the Reverend Frank Ritchie in studio. Frank, thanks for coming in again. Nice to have you back in the studio.
Oh, look, it's nice to be back. You guys are one of the highlights of my week.
It's a healthy mindset to have you in the studio as well. It's good for our health, I think. As we leave the first discussion, I think overall it's very good for our mental health.
Well, this one is going to connect a little bit with that last one, I think,
I don't know. No, we're talking cynicism. What are we on with cynicism?
You
Frank?
need it, bro.
Yeah, well,
Well, actually, it's not just you. I think it's becoming our culture, if it hasn't become our culture already. But the history of cynicism is really interesting, if people aren't aware of this. It started out as a Greek philosophy, and the very first cynics were people who wanted to pursue virtue, so wisdom and the ability to act rightly in any given situation. And they saw the trappings of society and the norms of society as working against that. So the cynics were people there who then would mock society, try and shock society into virtue, and they would run away from the pleasures of society. And so the term cynic is this morphing of some words where people would describe them as being like dogs, because they would often smell, they wouldn't be dressed like everybody else, they wouldn't act like everybody else, they would act in ways that sometimes were shocking. So they were called dog-like. That's where the term cynic comes from. But then it morphed over time, and I think in the 1500s, 1600s in English, it started to describe people who ultimately didn't see any good in anybody else. They couldn't find the good in other people, and they couldn't find good in society. They couldn't find good in the world around them. So they were critical of everything. And then it's morphed a little bit further to come to describe just this idea that it's impossible to spot good, so I'm not going to bother. It's much easier to point out the negative and to find the bad. There is nothing good in the world. And I think we've got to the point where we're so bombarded by headlines about how bad the world is. We're so overwhelmed by the digital world that you get to the point where you just don't believe that truth, beauty, and goodness are real. And it's easier to put your head in the sand, or to expect nothing good of other people, and to expect nothing good of the world. And that's not a Christian worldview. But if you look around, you can see it everywhere. That is cynicism. I think cynicism is our culture. We've lost trust in institutions. We've lost trust in other people. We've lost trust in the goodness of the planet, even when we start talking about things like climate change. The planet is just going to bite us. And I'm someone who believes in climate change. But Christianity calls us to truth, beauty, and goodness, to see truth, beauty, and goodness. So as we go into 2025, where there's going to be a lot to be cynical about, as the political messaging continues to bombard us, stories of war and everything, it'd be very easy to put our head in the sand. But I think our faith calls us to truth, beauty, and goodness, to see it, to recognize it, to uphold it, and to promote it, and to call other people towards it. Now, that doesn't mean kind of a cheap positivity that doesn't recognize the reality of the world. We had discussions during Advent about being hopeful realists, spotting the world as it is. And I think if you believe in truth, beauty, and goodness, then the way to respond to the stuff that is bad in the world is not to get cynical, it's to lament and to grieve the bad that goes on in the world, because it's not who we are and it's not who we could be. So very quickly, just don't let cynicism take over this year.
It's very hard in the digital age.
Very
You're bombarded
hard
with it all around you. Now, how do you see past the perceived good, beauty that you may see on social media? Because a lot of us, me included, I'll put my hand up, when you do see good on social media or perceived good, you do bury your head in the sand and go, oh, this is somebody else trying to be the good. And that's cynicism in itself, right? So I'm drawn to ignore even the good that you see on social media.
Which is why I think we need to recognize how digital our lives have become. And I think to spot real truth, beauty, and goodness, I think involves stepping away from the screen. This is a challenge for me as well, who's someone who automatically picks up my phone to fill space and starts looking at Instagram reels. We're coming to measure the world based on what goes on digitally. That's not, it's a form of reality and it's part of reality. We can't deny that, but it's not the wholeness of reality. And you'll find that things like sitting down with someone and having a face-to-face conversation is very different from the conversation you might have with them online. So I'd say if you want to really see truth, beauty, and goodness, don't let the screen be the mediator. Step out into the world. Do real relationships with people. Sit down with people. Go for that walk outside and see what the weather is really like and what the earth is really like. Get involved in the real world.
Well, as someone who is definitely prone towards cynicism more than the opposite, I like the term that they used about being a hopeful realist.
Yes.
Right? And I think that's a stepping stone that a lot of people could probably manage within themselves, trying to turn that ship a little bit in their mind.
Because if cynicism is just getting to the point where you can't spot the good and you don't believe there is any good, then there is nothing in our Christian worldview that allows for that.
Man, you've hit the ground running this year. Look at you.
Hey.
Good to have you in, Frank. We'll see you again next week, eh?
Yes.